Hi, good afternoon everybody. My name is Pablo. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to be talking about the risk posed by the trade in exotic reptiles in Australia. Mostly because I think it's something that we are not very aware of the risk that it poses, or the invasion risk and the biological risk posed by the importation of exotic reptiles in Australia. First of all, we all know about the biodiversity crisis and that the important contribution of the wildlife trade to this biodiversity crisis. In the source populations where the animals are extracted from to source the demand of the pet trade, usually it's pet trade, they are experiencing severe declines in the populations, mostly because humans, or we tend to be very greedy and we like to extract as many animals as possible just to have them in our houses or in the zoo or whatever. And this is making populations of reptiles suffer quite a lot, and particularly boas and pythons and things like that worldwide are suffering the extraction of way too many individuals from the wild populations. But also in the countries of destiny of these animals, they can pose a significant and important biosecurity risk, mostly because if they are released, they pose the same risk as any other invasive species. You release something, it may have some characteristics or traits make them prone to establish in the environment. And once they establish, reptiles are very difficult to eradicate. In fact, I know of only one case where an exotic population of a reptile has been ever eradicated, and it was in Australia and in offshore Ireland. Otherwise, you will have things like the Everglades, Florida, Guam. Nobody wants that. So, in Australia, to manage the problem of exotic reptiles, you have the Environmental Biodiversity Protection Act. So, there's nothing allowed. You cannot import legally any exotic reptile into Australia unless it's for a zoo or something like that. So, but not for the private trade. You cannot. But that means that, on the other hand, that you may be promoting the illegal trade in reptiles. Just because, again, humans are greedy, we are greedy, and as soon as something is banned from the trade, we would like to have that thing. Particularly that thing, because we like that thing. And that has a name. It's called the Ali anthropogenic effect. So we like things that are rare or scarce, things like that. The problem is that it's also the illegal trade in Australian reptiles or whatever thing. It's also associated with very high-profile criminal activities like drug smuggling or people smuggling or things like that are not usually managed by biosecurity agencies or a Department of Environment, things like that, managed by the Australian Border Force or by the Federal Police, things like that. So, given that these are high-risk activities, we were thinking of, okay, so is there any wildlife trade in Australia, illegal wildlife trade in reptiles? And in case there is an illegal wildlife trade in reptiles, is that dangerous? Pose any risk at all? Do we need to intervene or be aware of that? And that's what we did. We studied that to be able to ensure whether there is any risk or not. So we started by constructing a model for the establishment success of exotic reptiles in Australia. By establishment success, I mean whether any reptile have been able to establish self-sustaining population or breeding populations in Australia. And we included both the mainland Australia and the offshore territories and islands such as Christmas Island, Cocos, or all of the other. And we considered exotic species, both species coming from coming from overseas, like the wolf snake, Christmas Island, from Southeast Asia, but also the photo is not very good, I it's mine. The water dragons here in Adelaide, in the Torrens River catchment. Thanks, Peter, for. And we constructed a model on whether we'll be able to predict the establishment success of this species. And we included quite a few factors. that are known to affect the establishment success or drive the establishment success of exotic reptiles, including propagular number, that I will define as the minimum number of release events that have happened in Australia, whole of Australia, regardless of the number of animals released, because we don't have that information. We have only information for the numbers. And some other traits of the species, such as like body length, the annual fecundity, some physiological characteristics, here defined as the thermal safety margin, and also things like the number of congeneric species present in Australia, or not only in Australia, but also on these territories and offshore islands. And also the area of the region where the species have been introduced, because, of course, it's not the same to introduce a species into the mainland Australia than on Christmas Island, Cocos. So we ran the model and produced a model with these most main results. You will see that there is no difference in the likelihood of establishment in turtles and lizards and other things, and these other have very little impact. The most important effect was by far the propagular number, the minimum number of release events in the country, had a strong effect on so the more you release, the more likely there are the species to become established in Australia. But also we found that smaller species are more likely to become established in the country. Also, more fecund species are also more likely to become established in the country. So basically, propagular number and for the small species with very high rates of reproduction per year, while the other three factors have very little effect, overlapping always zero. So once we had this model to explain the establishment success of exotic reptiles in Australia, we went on to work what's the risk posed by the illegal trade in reptiles. We were lucky enough that in Victoria they have been running an intensive campaign to seize and record exotic species there from 1999 to 2012. So they have this very good information, high quality information, what's there in the pool of exotic reptiles, illegal trade in Victoria. So we get the information from the TPI Victoria on these species being illegally traded in the state. And we proceeded to evaluate, to use the model that we developed in the first stage to screen or evaluate what's the risk that these species pose, whether they will become established or not. Given that we found that the most important factor was by far a propagular pressure, we had to simulate values for propagular pressure, so from small to higher, mostly because you don't know in advance how many animals or how many releases are going to happen. So we just simulated 3 levels to explore the differences or the importance that this will happen. And we found for these 28 species, exotic species, this is the only turtle, the common snapping turtle, while the other are all squamates. And species with colors here are snakes, and species marked in black are venomous species of snakes. Okay? So we'll see that even for the small number of releases, the snapping turtle may become established if ever released in Australia, while the number of species expected to become established or may become established increases with higher propagular numbers, even for moderate number of releases. And this is by itself is concerning that exotic species may establish a population, self-sustaining population in the country. It's also more concerning that a lot of these species are really venomous snakes species. I know you live in Australia, there are Easter brown snakes in the backyard. But these are very big, like this bites here, it's a monster this size, this thick, with these fangs. There is no way that bites you and you're dead, basically. There's a lot of those species that are being traded just because people like to have venomous things or dangerous things for whatever reason. So the illegal trade in pets, wildlife, reptiles pose 2 kinds of threats. One, that they may become established at large in Australia. That's a biosecurity risk itself to the environment, but also a health hazard to the people, just because these are very dangerous things that I don't want to go into a grassland and be thinking that an ambush predator 2 meter long and autistic may be lurking there waiting for us. So there is a risk. That is important, and you have to consider and be aware that these things are out there and that they pose a significant and important biosecurity risk. So what about South Australia? Because so far I've been talking about Victoria, and Victoria is a different case than South Australia. I was about to make a joke, but then I realized that I'm being recorded and nobody's going to see the map, so it's better that I don't say anything. Okay, so the case is a bit different, but still, we don't know. Basically, because it's an illegal activity. Nobody's going to be telling you, oh, I have this thing, do you want some? Well, actually, yes. But they are there. We know there are at least a couple. Like this slider turtle appeared walking down a street in Salisbury a couple of months ago. And there have been a couple of detections of corn snakes and other things at large, like in Gola or places like that. So there are also illegal reptiles in South Australia. So they may pose a risk that you need to be aware that they are there and that they need to be considered as potential biosecurity risk in the state. And yeah, that will be it. Thanks. Questions?
Good sort. So we've got a couple minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions posed?
I'm just wondering how you actually monitor the number of releases.
The what?
How do you monitor? How do you know about how many illegal animals might be released?
Oh, we don't know. It's just a simulation to see different scenarios of potential risk. So we have 3 scenarios. One, we will say that only one release. That's more likely to happen. Then we have a moderate scenario, it's 3 releases, and then the other one is 7 releases, independent. And these 3 values are based on basically the smaller number recorded in our database of species that have already established population in Australia. So there are a couple of examples of species that have been released only once, but they have become established. And then the mean number of releases of a species, it's 3, so it's basically that moderate in the middle. And then the maximum number of species, of releases for a species that has become established has been 7. So we have simulated those values to see what will happen with 3 different scenarios.
Yep.
How many species are there in the establishment set?
Species established or?
No, for the first model.
But established or introduced only?
What?
I don't remember. 61.
I being an aquatic ecologist and being to fish and that sort of stuff, I watch a lot of Facebook groups, and I very regularly see illegal fish being traded through those sort of relatively public forums. Do you have any idea of whether those are actually monitored for anything like to record the sort of presence of these species, and if anything's actually done about it?
For fish?
For reptiles, I know just by viewing that there is a lot of illegal trade in fish of species that just shouldn't be here. I'm just wondering if it's the same in the reptile world.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I'm also in quite a few Facebook groups and things like that, and the only thing that they usually report is when they found things at large, like a boa in Melbourne or Sunshine Coast and things like that, and corn snakes.
Okay.
But no, I don't remember. I mean, I've seen a couple of things being advertised in forums, like the sliders and things like that, but that's it.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you very much. That was very good. All right. So coming up next, we've got Robert, who's going to be talking about major